GM, GM. So you've seen these higher time frame paths, but on Bitcoin, I'm going to look at some lower time frame price action and take a look here at what we could expect to see this week. So gonna put on the 50, 100, 200 on a few different time frames. So you can see the different trends. The 1 hour trend is obviously gone. There's no 1 hour uptrend. 4 hour trend is still intact for Bitcoin, but it's really shown multiple attempts to hold the 50 once, twice, three times, and now four, and they're all failing. So it's quite likely that we go towards the 100, right? Just saying that the more times it tries to hold that, the more likely it is that it eventually fails. So out of my eyes there for one level to keep an eye on, which would be, that's just as of right now. Of course, this will change. H4 to 100. Obviously, that line will move, but I'm just putting it there for reference. Daily, we're still way above any of those bands, and we have the daily EMA bands, which it's holding off now. Same thing, touched it on Wednesday, touched it again on Friday and on Saturday. Now it's touching again. Will that hold? Not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if we go down to towards the 21 day EMA. These are just some levels along with the horizontal price action that we have too. Not 12-minute, 12-hour, pushing down through the bands. There's a 50 down there. 6-hour. Here's a sort of interim level for today, I would imagine, right at that 50.8 level, which is also a support. So this is the 6-hour H6 50 EMA, but also this is a price level that I have had marked for a while. So 50.8 is a level where I see price finding support, moving up towards 51.5 and then towards 52.3 or 52.4. So looking at all those levels now and take off all the EMAs, there's a tendency for Bitcoin to keep bouncing here, and it's for a very simple reason. The ETF flows are still positive, right? So every day, the weakness that presents on Bitcoin is the highest probability of happening early in the session or late. So what does that mean? You'll notice here that today, off the open, we basically dump straight down. Now, the New York session starts in this candle. So I'll actually go to the 1 hour, get it more accurate. So 2:30 UTC is when it starts. And you'll note this, that on any of these days, like we go back to Tuesday, let's go from Wednesday. So you'll see the same thing happening here. And there is the New York Open there. And then we have Thursday, New York Open is there. And then we have Friday, New York Open is there. So on Wednesday, off the open, declined all the way into New York session, and then it held. On Thursday, where was the Thursday open? Thursday, we dipped down, pushed up, so kind of went sideways, but into the New York Open, found support and moved up. Then it weakened off. Then from the daily open on Friday, we declined all the way into New York Open, down ever so slightly, going into that session, but we held. So broadly, the market doesn't seem to be breaking down during the New York session. If anything, especially if we've opened the session, like we did here, if we opened and went down all the way leading into New York, I'd expect probably some kind of chop where maybe it goes a bit lower into it and chops sideways during the session, or down into it and actually recovers and rallies in the New York session. Because apart from one day last week where we had a small outflow, every day there is, hundreds of BTC being hoovered up by the ETFs, which is coming in at, millions, or sorry, well, it's hundreds, not hundreds, hundreds of millions of BTC, sorry. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin getting eaten up. So 200 million is a pretty standard number now. Sometimes it's as high as 5 or 6. Sometimes it's a bit lower. But the market broadly is seeing that there is demand in these ETFs at these levels, right? Across this last 2 week span, where we're looking at since when? Since the 14th of February. So since the 14th, we saw 300 mil, 450, 470, 320, 130, minus 35, 250, 230. So there's clearly demand for ETFs to buy, to have net inflows and to accumulate at these levels. So I don't expect any big breakdown to come during the session. It can go lower, and I do think we go lower, and I think we take these levels out, but I'd be looking at this 58, 50.8, 50.17, and 49.7. Those are levels I'm looking at on an intraday basis, to where if we dip down now, like in the next 3 or 4 hours, and we go lower into the New York session, and then we start to see price finding a little bit of support at those levels, I'd expect Bitcoin to find and form a base to then push higher. It doesn't have to happen during the session, right? You can see here that this is Friday's session began here, and we went chopping sideways and then dipped lower into Saturday, but then recovered up. So same thing I'm looking at over here is I just don't think BTC is heading for, any kind of big breakdown, because when you take away all of this and look at the actual ETFs themselves, so you've got an ETF all-time high, and these are important levels to watch, right? The ETF all-time high for BlackRock, the iShares, that's when the ETF buyers are actually at their own all-time high. So forget the 50K Bitcoin and all that. This is actually when they have reached their own ETH, which means everyone who ever bought an ETF is in profit, which is a big psychological level. And then you have a couple of these moving averages. So you got the 1 hour bands, which are chopping sideways. You got the 4 hour bands, which are still holding in a really strong uptrend. And you got the 1 hour 50, which we're chopping at here. And I look at this as being very, very, very similar to what we saw over here, right? Where price rallies up, consolidates sideways, rallies up. Big rally up, consolidating sideways. And I think this is all setting up for another leg higher. So you have to watch, how is it trading within the session, right? So quite clearly, we haven't been below the 50 EMA on the 1 hour for anything more than a few hours in this whole rally. So as long as we keep staying above that, that's important. If we start to spend too much time below there, that's when you could see some more actual weakness present and maybe another leg down. But outside of that, I expect just more and more demand to keep coming in as people see that 50K level, which can be 50 to 52, and they see that ETFs are buying there. There is accumulation going on there. And the longer it takes for Bitcoin to break down, the more likely I think it is that it actually just holds, compresses, squeezes, and eventually breaks higher. But with the way, alts are moving, and certainly this is there's a gap here. There's a potential for some pullbacks across the market right now, but I wouldn't get too excited if it was a bear, right? If Bitcoin drops down, I expect there to be solid demand at all these levels. So at the 50K level, obviously we haven't touched 50, the round number, yet. So we might hold 50.8 again. We might touch down towards 50 or even dip just below it to sweep out any people's, there'll be a bunch of stops that are below 50 that could get wicked out. And so I'm not taking a long here, but if we go lower, I'll be looking at low time frame bottoms to form to capture some longs. But again, it's the trend that we're seeing. So if I continue to see strength during the New York sessions, which we've been seeing, even if it hasn't been going pumping, the New York sessions have never broken down below 50, right? They keep holding and then we bounce up, and then holding, we bounce up. Now there is progressively weaker bounces where we touched it here. We had a nice move all the way to 53. We came back down, touched it again, bounced to 52.5, touched again, bounced to only 52, touched again, bounced to just about 51.9. So it is having weaker and weaker and weaker bounces. So typically when you see that kind of action, you do expect, all else being equal, that if price is doing this on a support level, you expect that support level to give way. So I wouldn't be surprised if it does give way, but I would also expect that we set a trap down there and then pop back up, and then that's where Bitcoin goes and runs for the highs. So if we do see it, I'll be looking at this as an area to get long. So I'll keep that updated in trading analysis. The fact alts have been running a little bit gives me a bit of pause to say I think we might not be buying the first dip. It depends on what some of these alts look like. Like I was looking at Filecoin earlier, just like, if it rallies up from here, and again, Filecoin's below this sweep level. So if you look at it like there, that's a pretty solid top. It pushed above the liquidity level, closed back below. So a lot of people would have shorted that. Then they got blown out and stopped out here, and it came back again. They would have shorted it. Then it pushed again and stopped those people out, and they would have got wrecked. And we pumped off the open, and we're back below. So like, just taking this as an example of one alt, it seems that downside is more likely than upside, just based off that, and based off these 4-hour or even hourly candles. But we'll see. The market has been very, very resilient. The dips have been getting bought. So it's too early to say that there's going to be any kind of significant pullback. I do think, though, that some of these alts, a bunch of them across the market, ETH as well, ETH has room to go a little bit lower or go sideways. I don't know what Sol's been doing. Sol hasn't really performed well at all. Yeah. So it's kind of a mixed bag for alts. And then you look at like stuff like Render that seems to be putting in a top, bounce, lower high. This typically would have me think that it goes a little lower to reaccumulate and then go higher after. One leg, two legs, maybe even a third leg, right? So one push, two pushes, three pushes. We could see that. I would just say, like, looking at these charts where they are right now, it wouldn't be something that would have me wanting to rush in and add longs, given the moves they've had. But that's just me, right? I don't see any clear setup here. Like, look at Render. I don't see any real asymmetry, like getting long. Is it super obvious to get long here? Do you have really good risk reward and a really tight invalidation? Not really. Like, it's like longs have had their easy couple of weeks, and I would rather wait for either some kind of sideways base to build or a bit of downside. And so when you look at that with alts, that usually coincides with Bitcoin showing a bit of weakness. Because if Bitcoin takes a little bit of a move down, the alts will flush more. So it's all one big trade. And yeah, so in short, I'm expecting Bitcoin to be resilient during the New York session. So I wouldn't expect necessarily any big breakdowns. We could get one before the session. I think once we get into New York session, there's probably going to be some support found, as we know there's ETF buyers. And unless we get a day of outflows, which we might, we had an outflow day last week. But if we get another day of positive inflows, I would say Bitcoin will continue to hold. Alts will continue to hold. But then after today's session, so after New York session closes, and we go into the daily close and into Tuesday's open, that's where you could possibly see the next leg down for some alts to take out some of this liquidity. Like for Render, maybe it just wants to grab those stops at least and touch the 50 EMA. But we'll see. We'll see. So that's it. GM. And I'll see you all later on the live stream. 5 p.m. UTC.